Hi, welcome to another episode of Summit Racing Quick Flicks. Hey, we're going to continue with our look at the Holley Performance 4 barrels, the 4150 and 4160 series carburetors, and we're going to pick up with the accelerator pump circuit today. All right, so 4150, 4160 Holley Performance carburetors, the accelerator pump circuit, okay? If I have, let's say I'm dialed in, my idle circuit's running, my fuel inlet circuit is good, I've used my vacuum gauge thing and my floats are at the right level, all that's fine because it's very important that this is, that these are tuned in so that I can come to my accelerator pump circuit and get it dialed in also. Let's say I go for a moment of test and tune, okay? And I want to try coming from a stop, and I really want to get that seat of the pants moment where I go right into wide open throttle. Maybe I'm trying to do a burnout on my drag car, okay? And maybe I'm trying to get that maximum acceleration. You know, basically, if you think about it, from an idle circuit to wide open throttle, quite often is the performance that we're after. If I put the hammer down, if I give it all the throttle it's got, and I initially hesitate and then take off, I want to come back and increase my boosters, or pardon me, not my booster, but increase my nozzle or squirter size, okay? If I take off well, and then maybe a moment or two later, I hesitate or feels like I'm tipping over, then I want to decrease my squirter or decrease my nozzle size, okay? So let's talk about nozzles. Nozzles should be the first thing that we work with when we're dialing in our accelerator pump circuit. And it's something that I found to be true. It's what Holley suggests on initial tuning. So this is a standard nozzle, very common, they work well. There are times when you may want to consider something other than a standard nozzle. There is a block style, okay, a block style nozzle, two little holes here, one for each venturi, and there is also a tube style nozzle. Now the tube style is kind of interesting. I kind of prefer the standard or tube. I don't really lean toward the block style. It's kind of an old design, but it's still around, and there are places for it. But we're primarily looking for as much performance and efficiency at the same time that we can get out of this tune, okay? So the standard nozzle and your tube style nozzle. Now you can hopefully see, you know, basically they're the same chassis or the same body, so to speak, but the tube style does give you that extra length of tube to point more towards the booster, okay? Ideally, the squirt that's going to come from here is going to come right toward the annulus or the ring of the boosters that we looked at the last time, okay? Reason being is because of the venturi effect. We want to pick up as much venturi effect as we can, even with the squirt from our nozzles or squirters, okay? Now, they're also labeled or stamped for the size. When you make a booster, or pardon me, when you make a nozzle size, you try moving in 2 or 3 sizes at a time, okay? In your initial couple changes, you might want to move from a 31 to a 34 or a 35 or something along that line, but move more than one. If you just go one size at a time, you're going to waste money for a while until you get close, and then you're going to have all these extra nozzles that you can't use, at least in this application. But you have a lot of nozzles, okay? So make a nozzle change in 2 or 3 sizes in an increment. Okay, so nozzles, they are notched, so they can only go in one way. This particular one here, since we're going to be talking about this, I'll just pull this one out of my, let's see here, this will be the primary bowl. All right, now this one, as I take it out, my gasket is still in there. I looked ahead of time. I know that my throttle shafts and my throttle plates are closed, so, you know, obvious reasons, you don't want anything to head toward the intake valve if you happen to drop something. Now normally, and here we go, see I already goofed this, normally I would use pliers to get a good grip on this puppy when I take it out. If you're working on your motor, I would encourage you to use pliers. Don't trust your fingers because these little suckers get squirrely on you at times, okay? Now this particular one here, this is a tube style, as you can see. The size on this one is a 31. Okay, so now in the 30 range, depending on who you read or what you consider, but somewhere around 35, 37. Holley suggests more towards 40. But when you start moving into those higher numbers like that, you might want to consider leaving this screw behind, which is solid, and moving into a hollow screw so that you get more shot quicker through your nozzle. Okay, now this one here is a Holley. It's hollow. If you look into the middle of it there, you'll see that it's actually just like a tube, and it has holes on the sides, both sides, so that it allows the fuel to flow up quicker. Okay, all right, so that's that puppy right there. All right, so now initially we're working with the nozzle and the nozzle size to dial in our accelerator pump circuit. After the squirters or the nozzles, then you want to come back and do your fine tune, hopefully through a pump cam assortment, or at least changing some pump cams up and seeing what allows you to get a tailored curve. So now, I mean, if you think about it, with your squirter size, you've allowed the size thing to occur. Okay, here I'm increasing the amount that can be delivered. With a cam or a cam change, I'm changing how that delivery occurs. Okay, so it really is just like a cam. They have a curve or a lobe. They have a certain amount of lift. So they truly are cams. Most cams have at least one. A few have one position. Most have two, and there is a certain red or pink. There it is. It's the pink that has three. Okay, so cam position. If you're a milder build, maybe more of a torque application, you don't see a lot of RPM, you don't have enormous valves or a large intake runner volume or a really large lift cam, chances are the number one position is going to work better for you. If you're into a long duration cam, big intake runner volume, RPM, a big valve head, perhaps the second or the third position would work better for you. Usually those type of applications are idling at 900, 1000 RPM, even more, and that's where that type of cam in the number 2 or 3 position would generally be used. If your idle speed is below that, more towards a stock idle speed, 600, 700, 800 RPM, chances are the number 1 position would be a good place to start. Okay, so pump cams. Now, if you think about this, the pump cams are on your accelerator linkage. Okay, I'm going to use my old standby here, and I'm just going to roll the lever back. Okay, if you look in here, hopefully you can see this orange pump cam. Okay, so the orange is a 2 position, and this particular unit it's already in the number 2 hole, which was probably correct knowing where this carburetor came from. All right, so if you can see this, I hope you can. My lever, okay, it's just riding on the pump cam, and as my accelerator is activated and actuated, so is my pump lever itself. I can feel that as I move the accelerator linkage, that the pump arm is moving also. Okay, so one of the things you want to be sure that you check for on any Holley Carb is that as you move the accelerator linkage, the pump arm moves also, okay, instantaneously. It's very important that they're actuated together, okay? Thinking along this line for just a moment, also I mentioned this before, anytime you make a pump cam change or change your squirter size or anything, or work with the accelerator pump circuit, always come back and check your clearance on your pump arm to pump diaphragm, and check that with your feeler gauge and make sure that you have the 15 thou, and that was pretty good. It is in there. It's nice and snug where it should be, and I'm at wide open throttle. Always WOT for this adjustment, okay? So there we go. You heard it click. That's a good sign, all right? The pump side of things itself, I pulled this bowl off so we could see. This is a shallow pump. It's a 30 cc. There is a 50 cc available. Holley would tell you that chances are you don't need a 50 cc unless these other tuning methods are failing you and you haven't reached the full potential that you're thinking that you're capable of reaching. Also, 50 cc pumps are usually found in applications where the carburetor is a long ways, a distance from the intake valve. Usually that's associated with tunnel ram applications or the older style cross rams where there's a long distance from the venturi or the plate of the carburetor to the intake valve. Also, large head, large valve type applications often respond well to 50 cc pumps. If you go to a 50 cc either as a conversion or an out-of-the-box carburetor, keep in mind that they are thicker, and quite often you're going to need to have a spacer, probably a 1/4 inch spacer or 3/8 inch spacer underneath the carb to give you clearance on the pump housing, okay? Because otherwise you're going to, as you torque down, you're going to squish and maybe crack your pump housing, okay? You don't want to do that. Or if the pump housing doesn't give first, you're going to crack the base plate flange, all right? So watch that. Let's see here. I'm just trying to be sure that I covered everything. It is a diaphragm style pump, preloaded with the spring. As I said, this one's a 30 cc. So we've got our nozzles, we've got our hollow tube bolt, around 37, 39, maybe 40. When you get to that size, move to a hollow. Our types of squirters are 15 thousandths at wide open throttle. The diaphragm, the pump itself, let's see here. Our cams, cam assortment, other manufacturers do that beside Holley, but Holley, of course, we're dealing with Holley carburetors. And, oh, wait, one thing maybe, a freebie, how's that? Freebies are good. As I said, almost all pump cams have at least 2 positions, okay? And I've never seen a 4150 or 4160 come out of the box with a cam that only had 1 position. Now, and looking at them, yep, there it goes. Okay, whatever color that was, that particular cam had a single hole. And I think that was my light brown or tan that hit the floor. I'm not sure. Anyhow, all the other cams have 2, and as I said, the pink has 3. So I know I've got an orange here. This one, I've got the green, and this is a fresh 3310 out of the box. These cams have 2 positions. So before I even spend any money on a squirter change or a cam assortment, I have at least the benefit of trying a test and tune by just changing the cam position on my existing cam. So that's almost a freebie. All it costs me is a couple minutes to get to that point, remove the air cleaner, get in, change the position, tighten it back down gently, and try the other position and go for my test and tune again. And gee, if it feels better, it worked. If it doesn't feel better, it may give you an inclination of which way you need to head on top of how you responded, either by taking off quickly or by initially bogging, okay, as we mentioned earlier. I think that's where I want to stop for this time, and we're going to look at some theory here in just a second. All right, so let's continue with some theory, and we'll also look at some more mechanics involved here, but let's look at theory first, so hopefully we can understand better why the tune works the way the tune works and why the mechanics eventually will work the way the mechanics work. The theory here, okay, remember we're at idle. Our throttle plate is closed. Maybe we're at 600 or 700 RPM, the motor's at operating temperature, everything's just fine and dandy. The carburetor is doing its thing in a beautiful way. If at this point now at idle, I decide that I'm at the tree at my favorite drag strip, and I'm going to leave the starting line, and I'm going to go straight from idle to wide open throttle, okay? So now I've gone from a point of, let's say 13, 14, 15, 16 inches of mercury, maybe even a little bit more or a little less, but lots of vacuum pulling my idle emulsion of air and fuel toward the intake valve, and everything's grand, okay? Now as I tip in and I'm going quick, I open my throttle plate, the air tends to keep moving because air is much lighter than fuel. So the fuel tends to get left behind. It also pulls, it tends to stretch my emulsion back where the air molecules, if you will, continue to rush toward the valve for all intents and purposes. The fuel gets left behind. So I have a momentary ultra lean condition happening at my intake valve. The motor doesn't like ultra lean. There's nothing there to burn. You can't burn just oxygen molecules. You have to have some hydrocarbon present to get the combustion thing going, right? So what comes in and takes the place of that fuel, or what comes in and steps in and says, hey, I'm going to deliver fuel for you? It is the accelerator pump circuit at this point. And what happens is, as I tip in, remember we looked at this, and this is why I said it's very important that your lever actuate as soon as you start to move your accelerator linkage, your throttle, that the lever moves right with the throttle. It's critical because they have to happen simultaneously. As I decide to get into wide open throttle, I have to be depressing my accelerator pump diaphragm so that the pump is actually doing the pump thing, okay? So that transition moment is what my pump is designed to compensate for. Okay, so the way that the accelerator pump circuit compensates for this ultra lean momentary condition is through its circuit itself, okay? And the delivery of a squirt, often called squirters, or a shot or shooter through the nozzle into the venturi, hopefully aimed at the booster for more efficiency, greater atomization, which is critical at this point because remember, we're still trying to deal with a very low vacuum situation at this point. Okay, it's going to come right back hopefully because that's what we're tuning for, but the situation itself is that we are really low on engine vacuum for a few microseconds here, and that's what creates that stumble. And we're trying to dial that stumble out of our application, okay? And the stumble is caused by that ultra lean, okay? There's no pull in the motor. There's no power being developed in the cylinder because we're missing fuel. All right, so let's look at this circuit a little bit, okay? All right, so back with me if you remember this kind of deal here. I have my a throttle bore. I have my venturi effect going on. I've got my booster. And again, my throttle plate, we're at wide open throttle. I've got up top here, I've got my nozzle, my shooter, my squirter, whatever you would like to call it, within reason. And then I've got my bowl, my fuel level, my float, needle and seat are doing their thing. Remember, we've already checked all of this, everything's great. Then I have my accelerator pump, okay? My housing, and as I said, this is a 30 cc pump right here, okay? My housing is residing on the underside, the underside of my fuel bowl, right? Okay. Now, if you follow along with me a little bit here in this diagram, and here also, we'll come back to this in just a moment. All right, so my fuel is in the bowl. It's at the proper level. There is a orifice in the bottom of your bowl that leads to the cavity that holds the volume for your accelerator pump, okay? Now, these pumps generally, I haven't seen a piston style in ages. Almost all the Holleys that I can think of in modern times are a diaphragm style. The return pressure is supplied by a small spring. But what's happening, okay? As my lever is depressed, it creates an open moment where I get past my pump inlet check valve, okay, which would be right in here. That's what I tried to make this circle represent, which allows my fuel to pass because it's created a vacuum on the other side of the diaphragm. The fuel comes in and it goes out through my discharge tube, which is basically just a passageway in the bottom here of my bowl and the corresponding passageway on my metering block, okay? It leaves enters that hole and comes up the transition tube here. You can see it quite plainly in the metering block. And then from the other side of that, transitions over to the passageway internally in the main body. And lo and behold, right on the other side of that is my nozzle, my shooter, my squirter, okay? Now there are check valves on the pump inlet, and there's a check valve on the pump discharge, okay, up here. Reason being is we don't want to be pulling air over into the nozzle or the squirter, and you don't want air to be pulled over from the nozzle and squirter back through the system and into the bowl. So you have a check valve on both sides so that fuel can come in one way, air can't go back, and that fuel can go out one way and air cannot transition back. All right, so that's kind of like the safety mechanism built into the accelerator pump circuit. Air coming into this equation would be just the wrong side of things. I mean, we're trying to get air and fuel balanced again, not add more air, okay? So the last thing I want my little mechanical fuel injection moment to supply would be air, okay? I want it to supply fuel. So Holley did a good job in designing this circuit. So now, as I go, and one of the things I like about the standard nozzle and the tube style nozzle is that you want your booster, you know, here in your primary airstream to receive this shot either from your tube, okay, or from the edge of your standard squirter. And what you want to do is you want to try and get that lined up so that the spray actually goes directly to the annulus of the booster so that it helps create a Venturi effect. You know, here we are, we're Venturi within a Venturi, remember that one? So we're trying to get that fuel up atomized and back into an emulsion as quickly as possible, as effectively, as efficiently as possible. Let's see here. I think at that point I would just maybe summarize and say, if I'm, hopefully you can see this, okay? I've got that moment where I'm nailing the throttle. Either I have a hold on to your pants type ride and I'm on and the car's great, the truck's great, whatever I'm driving, it's hitting hard, it's going all the way through. That means I've got this circuit dialed in correctly, and the transition from the idle circuit to the main circuit is working beautifully, maybe even flawlessly. I've got it dialed in so well. If I get into a point where I get a stumble somewhere in there, in that transition moment, then I know that I've got my accelerator pump circuit work ahead of me. Depending on where the stumble occurs, tells me whether I'm getting too much fuel or not enough fuel. So hopefully a little theory here helped give you some insights to why we're tuning the way we're tuning. Hopefully the tuning steps help point you in the right direction. And I think that's where I'm going to wrap it up today. So again, my name's Norm. Today we looked at the accelerator pump circuit of 4150s and 4160s. And we'll continue this series going forward, and we'll get back to other carburetors also. Okay, so if you'd like to post some comments, that should be right in here. Also, if you want a subscription, over here please, and off here to the side if you want to see some more videos on Summit Racing Quick Flicks. Thank you.